Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the FDA eSTAR, and specifically, we're going to talk about version 5.0. Yes, you blinked. They came out with a new version of the FDA eSTAR for 510K submissions and de novos, and now PMAs. And it was released on Wednesday of this week, so this is very timely. But today's discussion, we're going to talk specifically about what's required for labeling in the eSTAR. Now, we're going to, of course, have to do some new videos for our 510K course. There's a link down below for our 510K course. We're going to do new videos talking about what's new in this version 5.0, and we're going to have to break it up into a couple of them. And I think one of them will just be about labeling. But this is the free version on YouTube for our YouTube Live. So if you're interested in more details, screen captures, how-tos, all that stuff, that's in our 510K course. But I'm going to run through fairly quickly today what are the specific labeling requirements. But I can tell you right now, the biggest change that I see, other than, wow, now we can do PMAs, totally different discussion. In addition to being able to do PMAs now, they've made some significant revisions to certain sections and little tweaks to other sections. The biggest change of anything out of the entire eSTAR except for the PMA is now they have a much larger section on cybersecurity. So all those things that they released back on October 2nd with the new cybersecurity guidance for 2023, and yes, our webinar, our cybersecurity work instruction is complete. I'm going to go finish that. And by Monday, I will have the cybersecurity incident response work instruction also completed because she's already finished that. I'm just doing final edits. But now we have a complete eSTAR section on cybersecurity. Instead of a couple of things, they've got a fairly major section on cybersecurity now. So I told you it was coming. It came in December instead of coming in October like I was expecting. But I also expected the cybersecurity guidance to be released like 6 months ago, and it wasn't. So it takes the FDA a little bit longer than I expect, but it's been released. So now we'll get to the guts of what is in here for labeling. Now, what I'm getting at is you have an instruction for use for your device or directions for use. It's usually a user manual, and it's usually fairly thick. And in that user manual or instruction for use or direction for use, you have certain things that you're required to put in there. So if you want a tip, here's the tip for the day. Go buy ISO 20417. That's information provided by the manufacturer. I see a lot of companies that are still referencing EN 1041, I think. That's obsolete. It doesn't exist anymore. You got to go to ISO 20417. That's the current international standard on what the information should be provided by the manufacturer. And that's basically the information you're providing in the user manual for your device. So that's tip number one. Go there, and that gives you a template. Now, you could also, as a second tip, if you're not currently CE marked, you could look at what's in Annex 1 of the MDR or the IVDR, depending on what type of submission you have, and look at all the requirements at the end of Annex 1. So in the MDR, it's Section 23. I have no idea what the section number is for the IVDR. I don't memorize everything. But that last section is about what should be on the sterile package labeling, what should be on the box, and what should be in your instruction for use. So you need to look at that, and that'll give you a lot of great feedback on what should be included. Another tip, go out and buy ISO 15223-1. If you do not have the current version, just toss whatever you have because it's absolutely useless and buy the new version because they have all kinds of new symbols in there. You need the newest version because it has a lot of new symbols that are important, like importer, distributor, just as examples. There are a lot of symbols that need to be included. Now we're going to get into I've given you the tip, go buy 20417. I've given you the tip, look at Annex 1 of the MDR. I've given you the tip, go out and buy the symbol standards. Now I'm going to tell you what's in the eSTAR for the labeling requirements. These are things you should have a little checklist. Do I have all these things? Or they should be built right into your template if you have a template for your instruction for use. And we'll be adding these to ours. So number one on the list is the labeling section. There are 7 sections here. First section is labeling, obviously. So, do you have a glossary? This is all the symbols with explanations of each one in, and you should even say what the source of that symbol is. Now, most companies don't include that, but that should be included as what is the symbol? What does it mean? The description of that symbol, like the exact definition of it. And then the last column, where did that symbol come from? Number two, MRI safety status. So if you have an MRI, if you have a device that could be used near an MRI device, you have to test it to make sure it's safe. So do you know if it's safe? Do you know if it's unsafe? Are you unsure? Is it conditional? So it can only be used if you scan to this point of the body. They have different types of symbols for different types of MR status. And there's a guidance document out there, and you have to make sure that you're following that. And a lot of people are like, why do I need to include this? Nobody would ever use this around an MRI machine. There's a lot of things that you don't think people would use around an MRI machine. And the FDA has got pictures of that device stuck up against the side of the machine because somebody didn't pay attention. So that's why the FDA is saying you shall have this in there, and they have a guidance for it. So even though you think it's not applicable and it's pointless, the FDA begs to differ. Number three on labeling, if you have a device that has a magnet, they want to know that information and know if it, can't remember the exact wording, but if you have a metallic device that is magnetically susceptible, then they want to know if your device has a magnet, and you should have a warning precaution in there. So you need to state that if your device has a magnet. If your device doesn't have a magnet, you don't need to worry about that one. You just say NA. Next, you have to have the indication for use in your directions. You do not have to have intended use. You have to have indication for use. It should be an exact copy, word for word, from FDA Form 3881, which is now embedded in the eSTAR. You have to have that. You don't need the intended use, and it should be very clearly labeled as indication for use, and it should be near the beginning of your instructions. And last but not least on the list, for the labeling section, you have to have the name of your business and the place of business, the address, so your contact information, so they can mail you complaints or they can contact you for technical support. So that's what's in the labeling section, section one. The second section that has labeling requirements in the eSTAR is reprocessing. A lot of companies aren't familiar with this because they're still thinking back to the old way of doing a 510K where they didn't even have a section separate for reprocessing. So if you have a device that can be reused, it's not single use only, then you have to provide information and testing on reprocessing. So reprocessing includes cleaning, disinfection, re-sterilization, and maybe even disassembly and assembly instructions. So this actually is the longest section where they have labeling requirements, and you only see this appear if you answer the questions correctly in the eSTAR to actually have those sections populate. So number one, clean and disinfection instructions, disassembly, reassembly instructions, clean instructions, so how to clean it, special accessories. So are there any special accessories that are needed for cleaning the device properly? Maybe a brush of a certain type. Medical washer. So if it can be used with a medical washer or should not be used with a medical washer, you need to say that. If it is going to be used with a medical washer, what are the settings that they should use? Time, temperature, number of cycles. Visual inspection. How do you visually inspect the device to make sure that it's been cleaned and disinfected properly? And then last three items, drying instructions, lubricants that should be used for the device if it needs any lubrication, like overtime for a reusable device, and the number of reuse limits. So it can be reused 3 times, it can be reused 10 times, it can be reused 100 times. Will the device automatically not work if you've used it too many times, or do you have to keep track of that? That's an important factor. So those are the 10 things in the reprocessing section that specifically have to be outlined in your labeling, and they want to know, what page can we find this on? Now we're getting into the parts that I'm more used to people thinking about, oh, I didn't know that was a requirement for labeling. So if you have a device that is sterile, and it's going to be like a catheter, and you're going to be injecting drugs into the body. For those types of devices, you typically have to have it be non-pyrogenic because you're going to be injecting fluids right into the bloodstream. And if it's pyrogenic, you're going to have the person go into septic shock. So not a good idea. Make sure your device is non-pyrogenic, and it has to be labeled as non-pyrogenic. Or if it's not, then you have to have special labeling. So non-pyrogenicity for any device that's sterile and is required to have that label. Next item, cybersecurity. Like I said, the cybersecurity is a big news section, and this is related to the new guidance document that was released on October 2nd, 2023. The SBOM, so software bill of materials, that has to be included either as a separate document or embedded into your instructions. And of course, I just closed the screen. Okay, here we go. Number two, the cybersecurity information in the labeling, so where it can be found in your labeling, or if it's a separate document. So those are the cybersecurity items. Next item, interoperability. So this is the fifth section where we have labeling requirements. Interoperability, they're looking for labeling on interoperability. And the only way you get that to appear is you actually have to indicate that it has wireless functionality and software, and then you have to answer no one time, no a second time, and no a third time, and then it will give you a place where it's asking you for information about interoperability. Next, section 6, EMC testing section has requirements as well. So what page can you find instructions for EMC related information? So there's actually some specific information from the EMC guidance document that the FDA published. You have to include that information in your user manual or instruction for use. And you typically have a little table, and you actually attach that right in the document. And it might take up a whole page. And then the last section is the wireless section. So if you have a wireless device and everybody wants to make everything connected to a mobile app and have wireless functionality, well, that's great. But now you have to have your wireless specifications. So what are wireless specifications? Quality of service, number 1. Number 2, frequency. Number 3, power. Number 4, distance. Number 5, security. So you have 5 different things just on the specs. Then you have to explain what your risks are related to wireless functionality and the mitigations. So I like to call them risk controls because that's the proper term, but everybody at the FDA still uses mitigation. So the risks associated with the wireless functionality and how to reduce those risks, that has to be included in your labeling. And last but not least, if you have degradation of wireless service, how do you mitigate that? Or how do you reduce that risk? So those are all the sections in the eSTAR where it asks you, all 7 sections where it says, hey, where can I find this information in your instruction for use or your direction for use or your user manual to make sure that you have a complete user manual. So companies that think, well, I'll just copy somebody else's user manual, a competitor or a predicate, that's a great idea. However, they got their product clearance way before a lot of these things even existed. There was no such thing as an SBOM. There wasn't as much wireless functionality out there. So you have to understand how all these things will affect your instructions. So our recommendation, and we actually did a video about this, do not copy somebody else's instruction for use. What you should do is have your own template based on the requirements. And I've given you all the clues where those requirements can be found. I've identified the 7 sections in the eSTAR where they can be found. You build yourself a template for this is what should be in instruction for use. You write your own instruction for use based on your risk analysis. Make sure you've got all the warnings, precautions, and contraindications that you've identified from your residual risk analysis when you did your risk analysis according to 14971. And then at the very end, when you've done all that work, then you go back to the predicate device and you see, is there anything that they included that we forgot that we really need? And maybe it's specific to their device and you don't need it. Maybe it's outdated and we use something different now. But don't cheat and look at theirs first. That's cheating. Go do your own first so it's done the right way. And it's not a plagiarism thing. It's not a copywriting thing. It's a smart business practice. Go out and do it yourself the right way first. and double check that there isn't something somebody else thought of that you didn't think of. And then you're ready for your design review, phase 3 design review, where you're going to do your design freeze, and you have the entire team look over those instructions for use before your design freeze meeting and see if they have any red lines to the final instruction for use. Why do you need to do it then? Because you need to do it before you do human factors testing. You need to do it before you do your clinical study. You need to do it before you do animal studies, before you do non-clinical benchtop testing. All that stuff should be done after your instruction for use are approved. Now, will you make some changes after formative testing? Sure, but the formative testing should be done in the middle of development before your design freeze, and you should be looking at different risk controls such as labeling and warnings and precautions and instructions and pictures, things like that that are going to be in your labeling. You want to evaluate them and see which one works best. So one of the uses of formative testing is to try to optimize your instruction for use in your training. So you need to develop this during that phase 3, the development, before you get to design freeze, and the design freeze should include review and approval of your final instructions. If you make revisions after that, you got to explain it, why it doesn't mandate that you have to repeat all your testing. You don't want that. So once again, at the bottom of this description in the video, you'll see a link to our 510K course. We are going to be having a new webinar in the near future for people that have bought the 510K course on the new cybersecurity section. There are a couple other things we'll cover as well. We're not going to get into PMA. That would be a whole nother course altogether. But we are going to get into the new cybersecurity requirements in the eSTAR. And we'll cover a couple other things. We might do an update because there's some new guidance in there related to endotoxins, I believe bacterial endotoxin testing. They give a little bit of guidance as to what the limits are. So that's very helpful. But we look forward to seeing you if you've bought that course. And if you have any suggestions for the next time we do a live streaming, please put them in the comments below. As soon as I'm done here, I'll be looking through those comments that you put up there already. And each week when I do the live streaming, I always go through the comments afterwards and get that up to date. If you have any suggestions, please let us know what you want us to cover next week or in the future on live streaming Fridays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye.